coronavirus has now been going for, what, 3 weeks? Is it, or something? Is it a bit longer than that now?
Well, coronavirus has been going since early last year.
Yeah, but in the places that matter.
Oh, right.
Oof.
I'd say still at least a month or so. I mean, the country we live in, England, has been on lockdown it's in its third week.
Yeah. Okay, well,
I couldn't tell you exactly when it, got to this country. I don't think anyone could.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's basically what I mean. So, people have been kind of talking about the actual consequences of this now a little bit more. When we first planned to have this conversation, this was a little bit before then, when everyone was kind of speculating as to what would happen going forwards and how everyone would react in terms of how people think come coronavirus is passing, and I guess it also branches into the extent to which people are going to accept the creeping authoritarianism that's come from this, because everyone's seen, I'm sure, at least one clip of a British police officer being incredibly draconian and obnoxious about upholding the quarantine or maintaining the quarantine. So, what are our general thoughts on that? Whoever wants to start.
So I suppose my nature, my disposition is quite sort of sympathetic to people like police officers, because in a lot of cases they don't tend to get a say in what they do. So with like the Hong Kong protests, a lot of we had quite a lot of sympathy for the police, because they were just sort of doing their job and then were so horrendously vilified for it.
I mean, they were shooting people's eyeballs out, but
I mean, yeah.
Just to play devil's advocate here.
To play well, I in my opinion, I'm the one playing devil's advocate, but yeah.
All right, is anyone here not speaking on behalf of Satan?
But if you listen to the reports, the protesters were bringing weapons and intending to kill the police officers if it came to it. So I think, overuse of tear gas is fairly warranted in that situation, I guess. But I don't know. I suppose my blame isn't on the police in this situation or in the UK. My blame is on poor direction of police resources and police, poor direction from above, I suppose, what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I would agree with that broadly, but at the same time, I was just using the police officers example, and the example of them draconianly applying, if that's even a word, the rules that have been set out, more as just an indicator of this kind of disposition that the government currently has, and how they're sort of acting, and the extent to which people are going to find it acceptable going forwards, perhaps, or not. That was more what I was asking.
Right.
I mean, I would take this more in the direction of how do you guys feel about how the quarantine is being handled? Because as far as I'm concerned, it is going absolutely fucking appallingly on account of the fact that nobody is actually obeying it. People are still going outside in droves. It took a good week or two before people were taking it even remotely seriously. We know how many people were gathering in parks and on beaches. I can't help but feel like the public at large is to blame for that.
Sure.
I was just wondering what your guys' take on that was.
Well, I guess my further question there would be then, do you consider that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know if you follow Morgoth's reviews. I can't remember if it's Morgoth reviews or Morgoth's reviews, but he talked about that, how there's just kind of an inherent... The way that he described it was kind of as an inherent dislike of being told what to do by the English.
I mean, that's the thing. Everyone, for the majority of people, spend as much of their free time as is physically possible sleeping and watching Netflix. For 3 weeks, we're told that we can't go outside, and all of a sudden, everyone's offended that their God-given right to lick every doorknob in town has been taken away from them. And that's when they all need to go to the pub, go to the beach, go to the park, all of a sudden. I mean, on the few occasions I've had to leave the house in order to get necessary items like food and stuff, I have seen an absolutely inordinate amount of joggers. Like, I refuse to believe there was this many people just itching to go out jogging constantly, because you never see them in normal day-to-day life. All of a sudden, we've been told to stay inside, and everybody's decided that now's when they're going to go on their fitness kick.
It's a common meme that's been floating around, but yeah, I do like the idea that everyone's just decided to be a contrarian. So going forward, the most effective way to actually get people to stop being so goddamn obese would be to just tell them they'll have to stay indoors and eat all the pies.
Exercise is now outlawed.
But yeah. I don't know where I am. I guess we've got a higher density of health nuts. Also, I think I don't know. Maybe I am a bit more out in the countryside than you, so the idea of people just going out for a walk out in the countryside where there's nobody else around is less of a. You know, you can convince yourself into thinking that's not going to be a problem because sure you're breaking quarantine, but you're doing so with no one else around, and you're not mixing with other people. You're just taking your dog out for a walk or whatever. So I can see how people can think that, oh yeah, fuck it, it's not harming anyone.
Yeah, I mean we have been told that you are allowed out for exercise.
Well, yeah,
yeah, I know, but people have been abusing it so much that they're threatening to take it away at this point.
Yeah.
Your one rationed daily stroll.
I mean, of course, there is the hilarious thing that you could go out as many times as you fucking want, and if a police officer comes up to you and goes, hey, this better be your first jog of the day, it's like, oh, of course, officer, of course.
I don't know, they might get the police drones on you.
What are you doing out? Isometric exercise. Care to join me?
Oh, fuck, that's an old meme to be bringing into this, but alright.
But anyway, okay, so to get back to the point then, do you think this kind of thing will stick for a start? And then beyond that, do you
mean the quarantine?
No, well, the measures and the powers that have been acquired by the state as a result of the enforcement of the quarantine.
The more I see this, the more I feel like I'm always on the fence when it comes to authoritarian actions like this, and the events of this quarantine have just convinced me completely and utterly that it's certainly got a legitimacy to it. Like, the British public is proving that it can't be trusted to govern itself responsibly. Like, it's like, all right, everyone stay inside, only go out if you absolutely have to. No one obeys it whatsoever. It's not good for anyone, themselves, their neighbors, the country at large. It's normally I feel like a few years ago if someone had told me that the government was going to try and force everyone to stay in their homes, I would be absolutely and utterly outraged. But given recent circumstance, all I can think is like, Jesus Christ, we were all told to sit inside and play video games, and we couldn't fucking do that.
Yeah.
So,
well, that just reminds me of a lot of the line of thinking that was pushed by so for a start, a lot of the early liberal thinkers, and then building on that, the sort of American founding fathers who talked about. So there's a quote floating around somewhere about by Benjamin Franklin, I think it was, about how liberty is only appropriate for a virtuous population, and if the population is not virtuous, then liberty is absolutely not desirable, because they just won't be able to regulate themselves or use the liberty in a constructive or useful manner. But sorry, I cut you off, Henry. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say. Well, okay, I'll say two things. So, going from your guys' point, I think that people can be forgiven a little bit, at least, or given a bit of leniency for not wanting to stay cooped up inside. Because I think it's easy for us to say, yeah, just stay inside, play video games. But so people like, our friend Kurt, who, he's a bit of an extrovert. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He's locked inside all day. And I think even us, if we're not even given the option of going out, there's something, at least for me, there's something a bit more to it that it just makes it all feel a bit more cramped.
In danger of derailing this, I've just noticed, given that we've only name dropped ourselves at this point after a good 10-15 minutes.
Mhm.
Rupert, you might want to introduce your two new guests to your channel.
It's too late for that.
Oh, okay. Then we're gonna skim right on
We're
over
just
that.
gonna
are we?
skim right on over. Yeah. Well, Henry,
Okay, then.
say
I'm Henry.
yeah, say hello. There you go.
Hey,
Kurtz, say hello.
Hello.
There you go. That's who's who.
Well, fantastic.
there you go. You have been named, Kurt.
Fantastic. Continue.
So the other thing I was going to say is that, at least what people at work have been saying, and I do agree with it, is that it will either go one of two ways. So it will either go like what happened at the end of World War II, where sure it was nice having the nice strong authority figure of Churchill, but people tend to like being given very large sums of money, and if this person says, okay, we're out of the crisis, we've got to stop giving you all this money, they might not vote for that person. They might vote for this other, socialist that's saying, yes, let's just keep it going. Or it will go the way of, a meme I saw the other day, based on Lord of the Rings, where Boris Johnson doesn't want to cast the ring into the fire.
I'm so glad we went from actual historical precedent to meme I saw the other day. For a minute there, I thought I was going to look embarrassed from coming to this conversation dangerously unequipped. But no, continue with your Lord of the Rings analogy, please.
Yeah, I don't think Boris Johnson. Well, it's possible that Boris Johnson won't want to cast his emergency powers into the fire.
Does this make Dominic Raab fucking Samwise Gamgee?
Yes, it does.
Or maybe Elrond.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's an unfortunate comparison. You're probably right, especially from the perspective of all of the lefties, particularly around Twitter, who have been raving about the fact that they were right all along because what they were suggesting has now gone into policy, ignoring the fact that there's a difference between advocating for a policy as business as usual versus enacting a policy as crisis.
Yeah.
There's a very fundamental difference there that nobody seems to be quite grasping.
All right, well, there's some. I just thought of something. These emergency powers, do you guys think that the government will give them up afterwards? Because I can't help but think of Rome when it was a republic, and when people would be elected dictator. No one ever actually abused that. Whenever someone's dictatorship came to an end, or the crisis that they were elected dictator to deal with came to an end, they would always give up the power.
Well, they always did. They always did until they didn't.
Mm.
Mm.
But you'll have to forgive me. I'm not actually sure what powers they've been granted.
I don't think there's been granted that many powers as of yet.
Well, we're not. I don't think we're exactly talking rule by decree kind of stuff, but they're definitely not being put under the same level of scrutiny as normal times, which is quite important, obviously.
Mm.
I don't know. This was just supposed to be a little bit more of an ad hoc conversation anyway. I would have looked that up if I'd thought to actually be prepared beforehand. So let's just talk about the powers in the abstract. As though there are some set of enormous powers. I don't know. We could even talk about Hungary, because that is more of a Hungary or France, where that is more of a case of effectively rule by decree, police lockdowns, curfews, the whole thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because Boris does have a history of liking to spend a lot of money on big infrastructure projects, and so with this amount of power that he's gained in sort of financial terms, he could go one of two ways afterwards. He could either decide that because he's already opened the floodgates to all of this this credit that's had to be acquired, and all the debt. What's a few extra million or billion on top of however many hundred of billion has already been pledged and spent. So why not just build a couple of bridges here and there, built like the one that was planned between Scotland and Northern Ireland, and why not just upgrade all the roads and build a whole bunch of new roads and upgrade all of the rail systems and just throw money at every project that comes to mind. Maybe to buy some boats, maybe just whatever. Or alternatively, he can obviously try and turn back the clock, as it were, and try to go back to business as usual. But in either case, if he doesn't do so quickly, then it's going to risk becoming an election issue. And then we very much would be in the post-World War II situation of, okay, one party is suggesting that we go back to business as usual, and another one is suggesting that we maintain crisis levels of spending and control and government oversight in order to do, to maintain their own policy objectives.
Yeah, well, I can definitely see that scenario happening. It does depend on what length of time we're talking over, I suppose. Because obviously the next general election won't be for a while. I hope.
You never know here. It's like a dice roll.
Yeah. But I can certainly see them keeping emergency powers at least for the next couple of years, even if it's just to make sure. So there's the theory going around, or the proposal going around, that we're going to have stages of quarantine. So we'll have like a few months on, a few months off. When the virus starts spreading too much, then we go back into lockdown. And if we're talking on that sort of timescale, then I think it is worth worrying about re-election and that sort of thing. But at the scale we're at the moment, I think that if he really wanted to, and he really was in that mindset, he probably could just get it sorted and done before the next election cycle. Or is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I'm basically saying that if he doesn't, that it is a risk that it'll become an election issue or a partisan issue if it's not resolved one way or another before the next election cycle. And even if it's just a few months before, then he'd have to have that over and done with a full year or something before. Otherwise it's going to be very easy for Labour to come along and say, "Hey, remember all the good stuff that came out of quarantine and how much not apocalyptic it was? Yeah, what if we maintain those levels of spending and whatever, and just put it towards making everything better instead of just maintaining the status quo?" That would be the argument, I think. I think it probably gets even more interesting on the continent, though, because you have the wrinkle of France, in particular, for example, where I think they've rebranded now, but what was formerly the National Front or Front National under Le Pen, they, as far as I know, they're still the primary opposition to Macron. But obviously that's going to be scaring a lot of people in France, I imagine, who backed Macron in the first place, because suddenly all those powers that Macron has been able to enjoy are going to be passed over to whoever succeeds him. And being that Macron's party and Macron himself are not terribly popular, unless that changes, then, well, things could be getting very spicy in France, put it that way.
I mean, I suppose that whole sort of authoritarian sort of like powers being enacted and granted sort of brings back to a point I'd previously made, where I go back and forth on it, where at the moment I'm perfectly happy for more authoritarian measures to be taken. That's because we're in a crisis, and I'm personally a fan of the government that is currently in place. But let's say Labour gets in and everything clears up, and they start using that to do something unagreeable.
Yeah,
that would. I'm sure I'd become a hypocrite all of a sudden.
Well, this is the classic liberal argument: is don't give powers to a party that you support in government if you're scared of what those powers would be able to achieve under a party that you don't agree with anymore. That's an odd way of wording it, but don't give away the powers that you wouldn't want, or don't support the powers that you wouldn't want being used against you, just for the sake of political convenience.
If only there was some way that we could make sure
if only
that
there was
party
one
stayed in for
party.
life.
Anyway,
We can make sure that
Oh, we're giving the game away this early.
yeah, no, let's keep that under wraps for a little while longer. Anyway, what do you think the effect's going to be on people's mindsets, though? Because that to me, that's the more interesting question. Being that everybody has been kind of assuming for the past 2 generations that we are basically in a post-pandemic world, almost. So disease isn't an issue anymore. We don't really need to worry about our mortality in a lot of different situations, especially via like a wide-ranging, widespread contagion. Whereas in previous times in history, that's been a very present feature of people's worlds. So especially when you're going back to Rome or something, then there was a smallpox epidemic every couple of hundred years at least, or some other kind of plague. And so I wonder about how much. And there's definitely been some data and research done on this, but I don't have it to hand right now. That's fundamentally affected our mindset, because one of the things that xenophobia is quite useful for is to protecting communities from. It is to protect communities from contagions, effectively, because, well, if you reject the foreigner, then you reject the foreigner's germs as well.
Not giving the game away, huh? I don't know, because talking to you and
I mean, I should add, I didn't necessarily state that I was either in favour or against that. Just that it's a feature.
Yep,
We're just
right.
describing.
If I hop in there with a shovel, I can help you dig out that hole.
Just we're describing is not oughts. Anyway, continue.
Well, I was just going to say, amongst sort of general internet viewing, I have seen a fairly minor shift, but it's been a fairly minor shift somewhat towards moderation amongst some circles, but then the people that are very opposed, like your classic Labour voter, have been pushed further off to the extremes.
What, you mean further into xenophilia?
Yeah, well,
because I haven't seen anything like that.
Xenophilia.
Pretty much all that I've seen is the random aggression that's been generated towards, well, Asians basically, and then the kind of expected accompanying of anti-racist virtue signaling, basically. But I mean, that has a certain folly all its own, because of course there were those instances in Italy where they had this widespread phenomenon, and they had that event for Hug a Chinese, which was a week or two before things got really bad in Italy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to have that's got to have an effect on the mindset of anybody who's actually paying attention to that.
I mean, from the purely sort of anecdotal sort of what I've been seeing, even in people I know, is that there is a sort of low-key racism forming against the Chinese. Just, I mean, I know the media had a shit fit when Trump said Chinese virus, but when I hear people just referring to it, they are often saying that it is a Chinese virus. It is a virus that came from China. China is responsible for this. Wu flu is another fun one. Yes, thank you, Henry.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a lot more skepticism, I suppose, towards dietary habits over in China, and so that's quite interesting. It's raising a lot of curious conversations as to the extent to which all cultures maybe are or are not equal. And even if you want to defend the idea that all cultures are equally beautiful, then just going from the purely utilitarian perspective of like, what are the outcomes of this? What are the pure outcomes of this? Eating bats seems to not be a good, not be a great thing to do, even if you don't think, even if you're not like taking a position on the suffering caused on dogs by that whole situation, and the hygiene practices. Just maybe just don't eat certain animals. And I feel like we're being made much more aware of that, and especially those, like I said, those tendencies in China.
What, you mean just China and its shitty sort of hygiene and food standards and practices? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, basically. I worded that quite poorly, but we are having our eyes drawn to the hygiene practices of the wet markets in particular, and how maybe that's not great.
I mean, yeah, about 2 or 3 months ago, no one. I mean, I'm sure most people didn't even know exactly what a wet market is.
Yeah. But then you even go further down into that and you say, okay, let's say, even if they did clean up all of their hygiene practices, and maybe you don't want to talk about the morals of like the way that they slaughter dogs, for example, and the deliberate suffering that's caused there. You don't want to take a position on any of that stuff. Just on the pure like abstract, the abstraction of this cultural practice of eating basically anything that moves. Maybe that's not a good idea. That kind of seems to be what we're finding, I think. Well, that seems to be more of a common perspective,
I'd say
anyway.
Definitely drawing that to public light, and then I suppose there's certainly scope to expand that and maybe start looking at other cultures and start saying, well, this or that practice is really unacceptable. I don't care if it's their culture. It's wrong.
Yeah, and especially, I guess this goes more into cultural imperialism in a certain sense, but considering how just a cultural practice that exists over there in China is having an effect worldwide, that's gotta have some cultural residue, or some intellectual residue, in the sense of whenever anybody says, oh yeah, well they're just going to do it over there, like you're going to have to, what, you're going to go and be a cultural imperialist? You could now legitimately point to an example where you would be able to say, yes, yeah, that is exactly what we should do, because otherwise it's going to be another coronavirus.
Right, okay, then there was a deadly silence coming over there, and I was really hoping that you would be the one to sort that out, Rupert, seeing as this is your fucking show.
Well,
I'm going to step up to the plate here.
I heard some thunks being thunk, so I'd have to.
Right, yeah. Really, we're all activating the almonds. I think there's certainly like a discussion to be had around how this is going to affect the world economy. It's all after what, a month, 2 months of it sort of being a major deal in the Western world. It's already sort of collapsing our economies.
And yet the markets are rising. It's so weird. Well, it's not that weird.
What?
I've heard some takes on it, on why that might be, but yeah, the market seemed to have got over it quite quickly. It's very interesting.
Right, I hadn't seen that. Hold my hand up there. That was just me being ill-informed.
Well, no, because you're entirely right on the fundamentals. Is we're still in the same situation of people being stuck at home and not able to patronize restaurants, cafes, all that kind of stuff. Some people aren't going to work. Some people are being furloughed. The unemployment situation is just as bad in the US, and yet the financial markets are improving. At time of
Is that not just because they're being propped up by the banks?
Yeah, partially. Almost certainly. Yeah. There was what did we get to? Was it 2 trillion or something that was pumped in just to the financial markets to try and alleviate the downturn?
Mm.
I'm not going to lie to you, lads. I would have been much better prepared for this conversation about a week ago. I have not been keeping on top of such things.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to talk more about the cultural stuff than the economic stuff.
Right. Well, I still think there's certainly something to be said about it. I mean, if all right, let's say that by the end of the month, coronavirus is blown over, we're past the peak of infection, we're all returning to work and everything. I don't think any significant long-term damage will have been dealt. If this continues on for like a good few months, like at least 6 months, that's going to have some serious effects. I just wanted to get your guys' takes on that.
I suppose it depends what you mean by damage, because one thing I do see economically coming out of this in particular is the a renewed skepticism, perhaps, towards free trade, because it does seem like in a lot of instances the theoretical basis for some of free trade is kind of being lost by the fact that it's difficult to get your hands on a good if you don't physically produce it in your country. You're at the mercy of whatever the other country who's actually producing the thing that you need decides whether you want it or not, or decides whether you need it as much as they do. So they could just decide that they're going to buy up your entire stock of like ventilators. Let's say that's been the big thing recently, and you don't have the facilities to build anymore. Therefore, you're just at the mercy of whoever else wants to extract whatever concessions they like from you in order to get them. Or alternatively, you just suffer whilst they sort out their own problems, because they're the ones that are producing it and you're not.
Yeah, that reminds me. Been meaning to bring this up. This whole situation has basically been proving every single Brexiteer right. The European Union is just not cooperating at all, is hoarding everything that they can for themselves. Every country is going all in for their own sake, their own good. And I think that's completely and utterly rightly so.
Yeah, well, to be fair, they have tried to set up a few things, but it did seem to take them a lot longer to kind of realize what was going to be the order of the day. Meanwhile, the national governments were able to step up and immediately start doing things like locking down borders, sorting out new hospital builds, temporary hospitals, beds, all that kind of stuff.
Well, that and the whole sort of like you said, locking down borders. It's like, looks like there was a point to that after all.
Yeah. Well, not to mention how, oh no, you couldn't possibly lock down the borders. You can't have border checkpoints. That'd be ridiculous. We're past that now. Right up until the point that it's actually needed. And then done in a week, no problem. That's the other wrinkle about this whole, I guess, turn to authoritarianism thing, because it does show how much power the government realistically does have to sort out a lot of these problems, or any problems really. It's just whether or not there is the will there to do so.
So, I think the interesting thing about the whole situation for me, or I suppose the summary of the situation, or my views of the situation, is in terms of actual damage, actual effects on, say, for example, the economy. I don't see it having that much long-term effects other than increasing our already very large debt. And I think the interesting thing about it is as I've been talking about, the cultural attitude, I suppose, to a lot of these things. In particular, something that I'm seeing, and if there is something that I'm moving on from, and you don't want me to, just shout now. But the main thing that I'm seeing is this renewed ultra skepticism of anything that China says or does, and the decreased trust in, say, just letting them deal with all of our industry and manufacturing processes. That being said,
yeah, Trump's really been vindicated on that.
I mean, I was just going to say, like, pretty much everyone who's been on the right over the past few years has been proven right. Closed borders are the solution and are working.
Yeah, exactly.
As you said, everything I wanted to say just died on its way from my brain to my mouth. this isn't going well.
All right, continue then.
Well-
Continue then, Henry.
Well, I was just going to finish off. That being said, it does depend on people realizing more that it's not just China that's the issue; it's the general sort of media establishment as well that seems to be supporting them. Because all the time that people are going, yes, this is very obviously China's fault. It is. And then suddenly they turn on the TV and they're being told, "Oh, don't be a racist. Of course, it's not China's fault. It's clearly Italy. Look, China doesn't have any new cases anymore."
Oh, it was quite fun. I think it was even described as a conspiracy theory at one point that China was hiding the actual amount of cases, and they haven't actually got it under wraps, or haven't actually got it under control, I should say. That was described as a conspiracy theory. Meanwhile, the moment, and even one of their mainstream sources, I guess, or a government source actually says, "Oh yeah, no, actually, the conspiracy theorists are actually probably broadly correct. We think that it's between 15 and 40 times as bad as China's been saying." Meanwhile, then the media just immediately goes like lockstep into, "Oh yeah, no, China is almost certainly hiding everything, hiding the true extent." And
I mean, yeah, it's like anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together could figure out that China is hiding shit at this point. Well, they've got 2,000 deaths or something like that. Last I checked, and Italy's like at least double that from what I checked, and it was just sort of like just a 5-minute Google search to look at the numbers and realize. So China, the origin of the virus, a country that is much more densely populated and has much lower hygiene standards, somehow has a much lower death count than Italy. Just really really makes you think.
I mean, not even just that. I mean, South Korea, which by most accounts, I mean, they could be lying as well. We don't know, but they're handling it a lot better than pretty much everyone, just through the sheer amount of tests they can do and how authoritarian they're willing to be by just like doxing their own citizens and locking it all down completely.
Yeah, I remember seeing something about South Korea had basically had 2 major viruses. I think SARS and I forget the other one, which had actually hit them really hard, and that's why they were so well prepared for Corona, is because they had sort of they had a sort of test run, so to speak, and were more prepared. But that is something that is definitely worth bringing up. The whole apps that track you sort of thing. Those are super Orwellian, and I'm really not. I'm pretty sure I'm against them. It's on one hand, it is a sort of like, okay, then this could probably be used to great effect to stop the virus spread. On other hands, we've seen what China can use it for, what they're capable of. These things basically just track everything, like everywhere you're going, who you are, people you meet, what you've been up to. Essentially, you're essentially just sticking a GPS tracker on yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're. What do you two think?
yeah,
Well, just
I broadly agree,
very-
but we're already. I'll just make it quick, Henry. But yeah, I think the boat's basically sailed on that already. I think we're kind of already there, especially with the way that smartphones currently work. Is it's a bit late.
Yeah,
it's a bit late
I
to be
suppose.
starting to worry about that. It's just a case of how those powers are going to be used, or maybe you can, or maybe we can
I
start
suppose,
talking
like,
about,
as it's.
or maybe we can start talking about, on the wider scale, I should say, we could start talking about making the government so inept that it can't, or scared to use those kinds of powers, rather than stopping them from being able to use those powers via some like law or something. Because I don't think that's going to work anymore.
I mean, just back to the point that I was going to make about them. It's these apps. Just how would you feel about them being implemented? Because I don't think I would be okay with it, even under the circumstances of, even under current circumstances. I think even now it's a bit too far. God knows what else. Like, they can start restricting your movement based on anything, because that's what's going on with the Chinese ones. You like, if you're if it's a QR code and if it's green you get to go, if it's red you basically just hauled off back to your apartment and welded inside or something. And just that alone, it's not that you're fiddling around with Steam and it's fucking confusing me, man.
Yeah, I just that was instinctive. I shouldn't have done that.
Don't.
I might have to edit that out. Or
Yeah, fucking blur that.
something.
It's only got your name on it. Anyway, where the fuck was I? Right. Yes, saying you'd been saying that that the government can already track you and do whatever with your smartphone. This app is just a really easy, tangible way of them just being able to really affect your life, control where you can go and what you can do.
Mm.
I feel like if having this app on your phone was necessary, it would have to be gone the second the virus is over. The second, and here I go contradicting myself again, just at the beginning of this talk, saying how in favor I am of the authoritarian powers, and now saying how against I am this these apps. I don't know. I feel like just saying that they can already track you on your phone is a wild understatement in regards to what these apps are capable of doing, how they're capable of affecting your life.
Well, I think
Honestly, I prefer the idea of of a lot of that kind of stuff being upfront.
mm,
If I'm going to be tracked, I would rather it be announced and me be completely aware about what they're tracking and how they're tracking me, rather than hiding behind companies that would gladly work with them, and backdoors and doing everything silently. Because then we can actually have proper conversations about how things actually work,
yeah.
and somebody has to go in front of a media circus and whatever, and explain why it's necessary to track people, rather than have it be
It's more than just tracking you, though.
rather than have it be the case that everybody denies that they're tracking you, and then a couple of years down the line there's some like whistleblower or whatever that says, oh yeah, no, actually they've been tracking you all along and they know everything.
Right, but I think you're missing the fundamental point of what makes these just so different from just simply being tracked. That they can be used to grant or deny access to just certain spaces or activities, and if they're already clearly got access through your phone through the app, it could worm it or anything you don't know. They could start reading through your tweets or your personal messages, your texts, find out that you've got a certain YouTube channel that holds certain political views. Next thing you know, you're not allowed to go to the grocery store.
Well,
That's what I'm getting at. Even though you're perfectly fine, they give you a red QR code and just blockade you inside. That's the point I'm trying to get across here. These are not it is not just a tracking pin.
mm,
It is a goddamn passport for your own country that they can turn on and off remotely for any reason.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's
yeah, that's major thing.
Horrific. Well, yeah, no, it's just, I don't know, word anything a certain way, and you can make it sound significantly more fucked. But yeah, no, I agree that it would suck to have.
Do either of you want to have a crack at wording that in a way that makes it sound positive?
Well, okay. I'm not going.
The government doesn't pay me enough for that.
An easy way to do it, because the way that these things are usually pitched is to do with the convenience of it all. Like, oh, why would you want to carry around your passport everywhere when you can just have it on your phone? We've got most of the shit, like your rail card, your bus pass, whatever else you need. It's got an app for that already. It's not that far of an extraction to say, okay, well, why don't I just have my passport on my phone as well? I'm sure there probably are people that already do it. And I think that the thing for me is that the mechanism for a lot of this stuff is already there and already being used, almost certainly.
I mean, the government can't use your fucking bus app to read your tweets and then lock you in your own home under the guise of you being ill.
But the government can arrest you for tweets that you retweet.
Fair point.
And your phone definitely does listen to your conversation even when it's off, because you get people that have their, they play games with their phone. I was reading about it earlier today. They play games with their phone where if they want to buy something, they'll just say or mention it around their phone as much as possible, not even being on, and just see how long it takes for an advert for that exact thing that they want to turn up on their phone.
Well,
And
there's a fun
it's not
experiment
even
for
that
us all to
low.
do. That's a fun experiment for us all to do over the coming week.
Oh, I've already noticed it. Yeah.
Like that.
It's kind of messed up.
This is another topic for another day. I feel like, because it's
Yeah, we're starting to stray off.
there's too much to talk about there, really.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's just have some concluding remarks then, because we've already been going for over half an hour now. Do you think that this is going to have a lasting impact on how we think about issues, like at a cultural level? Do you think it's going to have a lasting impact on the mindset of people in the West? Yes or no?
I'm tempted to say no, just due to the utter contempt people have been treating the government's sort of general consensus on this. Like like I said at the beginning, people are refusing to take this seriously. So I don't think, unless this goes on much longer or the restrictions placed on us by our government become more severe, if we carry on like this for another 2 or 3 weeks and all of a sudden everything goes back to normal, I don't think there's going to be any major cultural change from this. If this goes on for a good few months and we start having weird apps put on our phone and the police start really cracking down on joggers, then yeah, I can see that changing the way our society works.
I think it probably will, but I'm not sure how profound it would be. I feel like it has the possibility to just be like a talking point that people get tired of. Like, a lefty will say, "Oh well, I sure do love my Huawei phone. It's so great. I don't know what I'd do without it." The rebuttal being, "Oh, but look at what globalization did to, decimated the markets in 2020, killed this many people, blah, 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 blah." And I feel like people would start switching off to that. And I'm not sure if the general skepticism that people are having, even with like China itself, not even necessarily like the skepticism towards like open borders, globalization, I don't know if that will be enough to have that much of a lasting impact, especially if we get this socialist post-war, in quotation marks, government.
Or, if the media just decides they're just going to keep on pushing this narrative of globalization, pro-China.
Which, of course, they will.
Then, well, yeah, but then that could easily, especially if it only lasts a few more weeks, then they could bury it, and it would just get memory hold.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is always the risk. But at the same time, I find that I'm consistently surprised by the extent to which people will remember certain things. And there's also just the angle of if the more the media tries to memory hole certain things, especially when you just raise it even once, it becomes a case of, oh yeah, what happened to the yellow vests, for example? Oh, the media just stopped reporting on it. It's still ongoing. It's just they stopped telling you about it.
I literally haven't thought about the yellow vests for several months.
Yeah, no, but just those little moments like put more and more doubt in people's minds about how reliable the media is. Even if they've got to a place where if you actually ask them, they'll say, "Oh yeah, the BBC is terrible. You shouldn't listen to it." Then maybe they still leave BBC News on in the background while they're doing the washing up or something.
I mean, I fucking hate most traditional media sources, and yet I still watch the evening news.
Yeah, but point being that if you can get people to more actively reject it and you be more actively critical about what they're being told, then that's useful. So the memory hole thing, I think the power of the media to memory hole things is getting more difficult, I dare say. And for the record, I do think this is probably going to have an effect on culture overall, because to me, like I said earlier on, it is a bit of a reminder that we're not in a post-history world. We still live in history. Therefore, things like disease are something that we still need to think about, and plagues and all that kind of stuff. And there is a reason why there are historical movements both towards and then away from like wide-ranging free trade. It's one of the major reasons is because while it's a vector for goods, it's also a vector for disease. So being reminded of that is going to help us to recenter our ability to consider these issues in their full context.
One thing we know for sure is that people, after this is all over, are going to be a hell of a lot more grateful for when they can easily access 24 packs of toilet paper and 5 kilogram bags of pastrami.
All right, well, I can't think of a better note to end it on. Okay, so once again, although we didn't do an intro, I've been Rupert August, of course.
Okay,
Henry?
Okay, you go first, Henry. Fuck, I was going to say I've been Kurtz.
Sure, I've been
and
Henry.
continue to be so.
Or do you?
Fucking X-Files theme.
All right, bye everyone.